Thanks to our friends at The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Check out the link below, fool.com/the smattering, to get access to the 10 best stocks to buy right now. Bank stocks are getting a lot of attention right now. Sadly, most of it is negative attention. We are in some sort of a banking crisis between Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic, all being taken over by the FDIC, Silvergate Capital choosing to wind down its Silvergate Bank. But there's still some opportunities to buy, and two banks that look really interesting right now, JPMorgan Chase and Bank of America. I'm Jason Hall. This is The Smattering. I've got Tyler Crow here with me. I want to talk a little bit about which of those two banks I think is the better buy. Hey, Tyler.
This is one of those fun times, Jason, where I get to be a little bit of the dumb guy host and ask the questions because we're talking about banks. And as much as I've have tried to learn them in the past 6 months to a year, I am still very much struggling with this industry. But it's one in the headlines. And so I want to use this opportunity to fire off some questions at you. So before we started here, you mentioned JP Morgan as one of the big choices when it comes to banks. JP Morgan always seems to come out on top and walks away with some giant prize. And this time around, they happen to get First Republic and all the assets with it and some guarantees from the federal government related to it. So with that in mind, knowing like an industry that does periodically go through epic collapses and JP Morgan always comes out on top, is what would make anyone want to do something other than JP Morgan?
Let's go back to 2006, the beginning of 2006, when Jamie Dimon was named CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Since then, if you compare it to all the other big banks, like the big five, so you can throw Citi in there, US Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and then JP Morgan Chase, by far, it has been the best performing stock. It's the only one of that group that's even come close to beating the S&P 500. And then you talked about banks going through these epic collapses. The most epic of those in our lifetimes by far is the great financial crisis. If you look at March 2009 from the bottom, so I'm cherry picking a little bit here, but for a point, from that point, like the bottom of the market, when stocks, the S&P finally started to turn and move back up, there was still a lot of concerns, right? There was still a lot to be afraid of with banks. Hindsight bias in full effect here to say it would have been a no-brainer to buy it. But from that point, JP Morgan Chase delivered over 1,000% in total returns. 1,000% in total returns, just absolutely crushed the S&P 500. And along with, I think Bank of America was the only of those big banks that actually delivered better returns than the market. Like from the best day to buy them, only two of that five outperformed the S&P 500. And JP Morgan was by far the best. Now, here's my answer to that question you were asking at the beginning. Bank of America or JP Morgan, and your question is, why would you even consider buying any other bank? Because Bank of America is also a really safe bank right now. It's held to a higher regulatory standard. Brian Moynihan has done an incredible job of turning it around. And I would say Bank of America is the one that I would buy right now. And why would I not be buying JP Morgan? Because while every other bank has come substantially down as we've gone through this crisis period, especially the mid-sized banks and the regional banks, JP Morgan Chase, the biggest bank by assets in the US, still trades for 1.4 times book value, which is the high end of what I would ever want to pay for it in a really good time for banks. So you're paying a premium valuation right now. And that's why I think that's a big reason why I think investors would want to consider some other bank than JP Morgan.
So you mentioned Bank of America as a good alternative and using that kind of standard where if JP Morgan's trading at 1.4 times its book value, where is Bank of America sitting and what makes that much more attractive?
It trades for about 90% of book value. So you're basically paying 90 cents for $1's worth of assets in the bank. And again, a tremendous amount of those assets are going to be the loans that it owns that generate income. So you're getting it for a discount. And I think a more reasonable valuation for a Bank of America, one of these really high quality banks, is probably more like 1.2, 1.3 times book value. So again, I think you're getting a substantial discount that offsets some of the risk here, right, of owning any bank in this environment. And if you think about Bank of America, I'm going to put it in the same category of quality of bank with JP Morgan Chase. Brian Moynihan became the CEO in 2010, and this was a business with all kinds of problems. They had acquired Countrywide Mortgage, and they had their own internal problems. They had acquired Merrill Lynch, and you add all of the things up, and over the next few years, it would spend somewhere between 20 and $30 billion, maybe more, to deal with settlements and penalties to address all of those issues. So the stock continued to fall for a while. But if you look at from 2012, by the time Moynihan got its house in order and had the ship turned around, since 2012, this has been one of the very best bank stocks to own, has been a huge winner, even though the stock has come down a substantial amount. So I think if you put all of those things together and you're an investor that you want exposure to banks, you want to make sure that you're avoiding as much of the risk as you can, which really boils down to a crisis of confidence. You hear investors worried about banks. You don't hear a lot of people worried about banks in the real world. And they're certainly not worried about B of A and JPMorgan Chase. So again, all things created equal, JPMorgan Chase is the superior business probably. But when you're talking about that big of a difference in the price to book value and that you're paying in valuation, then Bank of America is an easy decision for me here.